Hi everyone, my name is Lee Perry. I'm the Chief Operations Officer of Ideas for Us, and I also oversee and direct the Fleet Farming Program, which is a nonprofit that transforms underutilized land into micro farms in order to educate the next generation of sustainable agriculturalists. So we're here today on Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day to all of you amazing moms out there. You inspire me every single day, and I'm so impressed by your resiliency and your patience in educating the next generation. So thank you so much for all of the hard work that you moms do out there. Today we wanted to highlight you. However, we are amidst a crisis, and I'd like to recognize that, we've had so many people during this time of quarantine and lockdowns across the entire country and across the entire world that have reached out to us wanting to ask questions about how they can garden and have more of a relationship with nature. And so today, during the virtual swarm ride, I'm going to show you around my personal home so that you can see some of my experiences, my ups and downs, some of the things that I've done well and some of the things that I've done wrong. Just because I have my hands in the dirt most of the day doesn't mean that I don't make mistakes too. And so we'll get started. First things first, I wanted to recognize that we're doing remote garden education opportunities. So every Monday and Thursday, we have a site on our website where we are accepting inquiries of people who want to collaborate and talk about their home projects, and we just walk them through step by step how they could improve. However, I will say that we've had so many questions and comments and concerns that are very similar, and I'd like to address some of those today. Some of the frequently asked questions or comments in general, the first thing everybody says when I pick up the phone for these remote garden education opportunities is, I'm a terrible gardener. I kill everything. We are going to address that today. You are not a terrible gardener if you have had an experience of killing something. Death is a part of life, and I want to encourage everyone to think of their experiences in the garden as being an outdoor scientist. You're going to have some trial and error moments. You're going to have some moments where things fail. But ultimately, you're just practicing, and you shouldn't be so hard on yourself and get discouraged and then mark yourself, label yourself forever as a plant murderer. That's like one of my biggest things in my career that I wish I could echo to every person I work with. Next, what do you do about pests like rats and raccoons? This is a very common concern, and I'll definitely get to that in just a second. What do you do if you live in an HOA? So that's another question that I'm going to get to today. And how expensive is gardening or vegetable gardening? And we'll delineate between the two. First thing that I want to highlight when I have these consultations is, the first question you need to ask yourself, how much time do you spend outdoors? On a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being maybe you go outside once a week. 10 is you're outside every single day, multiple times a day. You like to eat outside. You like to peruse with your coffee in the morning and weed your garden, what have you. Really think of where you are as, your relationship with nature today, and then try to assess what type of garden project you want to invest in. I highly recommend that you survey yourself first before investing in anything, because those people who say, I'm a terrible gardener, I kill everything, are usually the people who went in way over their head. They got inspired over the weekend. They spend over $1,000 at Home Depot, and then they don't know what they're doing, and so they just put seeds in the ground. And those seeds might flourish for like a week or so, but if you're not sure what you're dealing with in terms of the actual life and soil and what crop in what place you're working with, then you're going to have a bad experience and ultimately potentially kill whatever you're trying to grow. So do that little self-assessment, and also ask yourself, what do I want to get in return? Am I trying to build a little ecological system where I see more bees and butterflies in my yard? Is that my intention? Am I trying to offset my grocery bill? Is that my intention? Am I trying to reduce the amount of time that I'm spending on lawn care? Really try to do a self-evaluation as to your why behind gardening, and try to match that investment with how much time you have. And that's how you're going to save yourself a lot of heartache, by doing those internal assessments. So let's go ahead and get started talking about kind of my transition. And we're standing in front of my neighbor's yard because I love kind of doing a side-by-side of someone who really does care about their property. They have an irrigation system on reclaimed water that goes off sometimes at the height of the day. So you can see there's still some burning that's happening to his grass. Spends a lot of time and energy on lawn care and probably a lot of money fertilizing and using pesticides and things like that. But ultimately, you don't see any bees or butterflies. You don't really see any insects at all. But this is a traditional Florida home that has a beautiful aesthetic that people here try to gravitate towards. And I think if I were to die tomorrow, I would want my legacy to be challenging this perspective of beauty. I want to encourage people to expand on their definition of a beautiful landscape and really challenge themselves and each other and their HOAs, for example, on how to address this very resource-consuming aesthetic. When you have a lawn like this, you are spraying it with tons of chemicals that are not naturally found in most cases in nature. You are spending a lot of time on a riding lawnmower that expels 11 times more CO2 than the average car. You are not really leaving any space for any animals to take refuge during a hurricane or during a natural disaster or even a storm. This is beautiful because it's green and bright and vibrant, but it is not beautiful in terms of how we offset our ecological footprint with nature. So we're going to take a tour on my yard. I live here, I rent. My landlord, I asked him, can I plant whatever I want? He said yes. I said, are you sure? He said yes. But I try not to do anything permanent in terms of anything that will damage the infrastructure of the home. But when I first moved in here, I didn't really know anything about growing food to offset my grocery bill. I grew up in Massachusetts, where the soil was just so beautiful and rich and dark, had tons of minerals in it. But here in Florida, you have the odds against you, right? You have sandy soil, you have lots of rain, intense sun, you have a lot of pests, a lot of humidity, a lot of fungus that can happen. And I had to kind of learn from zero how to grow food through fleet farming and my participation in that. But, again, when I started putting plants in the ground, I had to do a self-evaluation. I was always busy going to school, working full-time, doing internships. And so when I started planting because my why was to build habitat. I wanted to build places for bees and bugs to live and thrive, and I wanted to attract birds. There was no life. In fact, the grass was dead. It was just sugar sand in the front and back, and there was no ecosystem there. So we'll take a little tour and I'll show you what the yard looks like now. So, when we talk about HOA, a lot of people can't get away with a thriving garden like this with an HOA. HOAs, their bylaws are typically written by people who deem that aesthetic attractive enough to intrigue people to buy a home within the HOA and pay their HOA dues, so they come up with these standards. I've heard of people that join the board of their HOA and combat this ideology, but it's very challenging when you have these very old procedural measures that happen within an HOA. So backyard gardening is always the way to go, and also creating a design and taking it to your board of your HOA and asking permission prior to investing a bunch of money and time and energy in your garden is my advice to you there. As you can see, I have these rows where I have vegetables growing. This is new. When I first moved in, I had terrible soil, so I just got a mulch drop right in the middle and created a square space to offset the amount of grass that I would have to cut. And I buried a bunch of cardboard, thick layers of cardboard, and just started planting native plants and taking cuttings and doing propagations of native plants in the large square that I had here. And for a first-time grower, I learned a lot. A lot of things died. A lot of plants were too dry. A lot of plants needed way more water, and I didn't have any irrigation, so I lost some plants. Other plants thrived but didn't come back the following season, so I had to just take note of that so that I can learn what plants are less maintenance than others. And then when quarantine happened, I decided to transform my front yard into a vegetable garden as well as my backyard, which we'll show you, and move my pollinator garden into a food forest area that we will also take a tour of. Well, why did I do that? Well, I want to offset my grocery bill and track how much we're eating so that I can make even more of a case than what we could do with fleet farming. Because with fleet farming, we transform lawns, we're growing that food, we're sharing with the homeowner, and we're taking the excess to the farmer's market so that the profit we make off the vegetables can go back into the free education programs. But how about the average person who wants to do this on their own without a whole team that can help do the maintenance? What is that like? And I wanted to tell that story. Again, I know which varieties are going to do the best in this climate. So if you go to our website, fleetfarming.org/veggie-list, we have an amazing list that we put together with our farmers through the years of exactly what crops you can select, what varieties of what crops for these specific conditions. And the other thing is soil. Now, the mulch that I had from the pollinator garden broke down, and so in some parts of this lawn, the soil has been great. But we still needed to build enough soil so that we can start growing more delicate vegetables, like things that need more nutrients. Salad greens, for example, they need some really rich compost. So we ordered a $500 drop from southeastern soil that was already pre-mixed with some nitrates and things like that were already ready to grow in. Southeastern Soil is a great company. We usually have gone with Monterey Mushroom Farm, but that compost is very rich. It holds a lot of moisture, so you can attract nematodes very often, and it's just wet and heavy, and it doesn't break down all the way. So I really recommend this. I do recommend Monterey Mushroom Farm if you have a little bit less of a budget. You can get a truck and go up there for $25 and load up the bed of your truck, and that'll be enough to do a small version of this, for sure. Our soil in Florida isn't terrible to grow in. It holds a lot of moisture. It is very hot in the summer by itself, but if you mix that in with some compost, it's not the worst thing that you can grow in. So we are lucky to have it. So yeah, let's go ahead and take a little bit more of a tour here. So some of this weed liner was scrap weed liner that I got from an old garden that we didn't, we had to take down. So you can see there's some areas where there's patchy grass, some areas of mulch, some areas where there's weed liner. I didn't want to spend that much money. The $500 compost was already a lot, but if you do a cost-benefit analysis of how much food you're going to get out of it, if you do have the opportunity to transform your entire front and your entire backyard, we've been offsetting a lot of our grocery bills so far, making way less frequent trips to the grocery store. So it definitely is paying for itself and the experience for sure, but not everyone has that budget. So you can do things like get cardboard from behind Publix and order a $75 drop of mulch from Budget Tree Service, or you can put yourself on a list from Tree Work Now or Chip Drop, and they will come and drop off free mulch when they're in your area. I don't like that for me because I like to know exactly when it's coming. We've had instances where drops will just show up and then you have 20 cubic yards of mulch on your yard that you weren't expecting. So, depending on what you have, that's what you can go with. So Budget Tree Service is who I called. I paid $75 for the mulch. And in some parts, I had enough cardboard and mulch to do a walkway that suppressed the weeds, which was really great. So that's why it's a little patchy. For trellising, we got some bamboo donated from some followers on Facebook. There's so many groups on Facebook. In fact, I've pretty much cleared my entire timeline on Facebook now, where mostly groups and posts from friends about gardening show up in my feed. And all of these groups like Central Florida Gardening Friends, they have a thriving community online of experts or people that it's their first time growing, exchanging information. We just started a group that is already flourishing, the Homegrown Network. And so I posted that we needed bamboo, and before I knew it, we had bamboo in exchange for vegetables delivered, which is really great. You can do the same thing for things like cardboard or flower pots, trade. Say, I will give you seeds if you give me bamboo. That's a really great, inexpensive way for you to play outside and be that outdoor scientist that you really want to be, And so the bamboo is what we're going to be using to do some trellising for some of our varieties. Let's take a further look. Okay, so with regard to the space and pests, so I really enjoy talking about this because when you look around and all you see is just grass, if you put your mind in the mind of a pest, of course you're going to want to eat that tomato. It's the brightest, reddest, most attractive thing in the entire community. So when people talk about pests, I always think, well, your house and your lawn has completely taken away from those animals and insects. So you sometimes need to lower your expectation of having a pristine, perfect garden with no pests. You instead should try to grow symbiotically with your ecosystem and expect for things to eat your stuff. Sorry, but if you're growing enough of it, and if you do things like find capture crops, aka things that you notate year after year that other animals like to eat, then you can create little sabotage areas in your yard where they'll be attracted to that crop and maybe stay away from your other crops. You have to take note of what pests are attacking what. And this is something that will change through the years, but as you notate what is attacking what, you can find out how to, in a very safe, natural way, combat those pests. For example, I purposefully leave wasp nests around. We have wasps that love living around our house, and as long as they're not right in front of the door, we'll leave their nests. Also, do your research. Good bugs versus bad bugs. We have an integrated pest management page on our website put together by Jeff Coco, who is an entomologist who worked with us for a year or so. And there are some great bugs and some bad bugs. You want to attract the good bugs because they will help you combat the bad bugs. And, you know, I just put in this garden and I haven't seen any bugs, really, any pests. Excuse me, only good bugs. I have been building on the ecosystem here for quite some time by planting natives, so that might be partially why. But also, maybe the bad bugs haven't had a chance to find that this is here yet. So for example, I'm experimenting over here with corn, right? Corn, you want to grow it in kind of like a grid, a square, because it's a wind-pollinated crop. So it needs to blow around and it needs to fertilize itself, right? And it loves beans and squash and different types of gourds. So we planted a bunch of corn here, different types of sweet corn and things like that, different types of corn. And we planted some watermelon, pumpkin, squash, summer squash. We just played around and put different seeds to see what comes, because I'm the type of person that I'm like, I'm going to experiment, but I'm not going to count on this pot, because I know that corn and squash is a big pest attractor. But I want to see what kind of pests are attracted. And so far, we haven't really had any pests. It's still a baby, so we have time, but the corn is coming up great. And so is the watermelon and squash. We'll see what kind of pests come. It's going to take some time. But those three things love growing together. So let's go ahead and move on to the next thing. All right. So after living here for 6 years and attracting butterflies and wasps and all different types of birds and bugs, you know, there are some plants that just do well at attracting different types of insects. For example, Mexican sunflower, which I'll go get a cutting of right now. It is one of the easiest plants in the world in Florida to propagate and transplant around your yard. And if you go to any of like Orlando permaculture meetings, or if you go online, you'll see a lot of people talk about this. And it's because the leaves are very, very nutrient rich. So it's great for compost. It's great for ripping the leaves up and throwing it on your plot so that it feeds your soil. And then the flowers are part of the Asteraceae family, meaning that it's one of the most evolved flowers ever. And it basically has two different types of flowers that are growing on one plant. And, you know, the outer ring of flowers, these are male flowers, and then the inner ring, it's male and female. They are some of the best flowers for attracting different species of insects. When you look at any type of sunflower, they are just usually beaming with life. They're very eye-catching, very vibrant, and different types of insects will actually live inside of the flower. Meanwhile, you're getting bees, you're getting butterflies. This is one of those plants that does it all. I haven't seen hummingbirds attracted to it, but in terms of how many birds I've seen in it during the day and how many insects, this is a win-win plant. Last point I want to make about Mexican sunflower is it grows so fast. So by cutting it consistently, you can get it to flower more. Then you can dry it out and have wood for your fire. And we've used it for our landscaping to put it in the westernmost facing side of our home to combat a lot of the sun that just pounds on our house at that 5 o'clock period. And by creating a nice dense wall, like a privacy wall, if you can see here, this is just 6 months of having these cuttings in the ground, and it's so lush and so rich, and it really helps us lower our energy bill and makes our home more energy efficient. So this plant is a win-win-win-win-win all the way. So I just wanted to highlight Mexican sunflower. We also have things that were otherwise considered weeds, like Spiderwort. This is a great plant. Spiderwort is very happy during the day in the spring. It's got this really beautiful purple flower. I see this along the side of a bunch of highways. This is a native plant that is usually looked at as a weed, and so people mow it. But this actually attracts more bees than some of the native plants that I spend a lot of money on. And it's just naturally occurring. I get these from my neighbors' yards. I just go and grab them and put them in my yard, and they do really well. So try your best to find things, like learn what's growing already for free in your yard and see how you can use it. So let's get to the crops. I don't just eat off of my yard, I'm giving it out to the community almost every day. Literally yesterday, some boys were playing basketball and I taught them how to harvest turnips for the first time. They didn't even know what a turnip was. And now they know, and they can come and harvest anytime they want. I'm building a relationship with my neighbors that I've never had before. This is one of the other silver linings of quarantine. I'm teaching them on what they can start to integrate in their own yards and how to harvest from here. I want to share. This is more than my boyfriend and I can eat. So this is an opportunity to be an outdoor classroom and a place to build relationships, right? And that's something that you might not realize when you're transforming a piece of your yard. In terms of how I plan these crops, I looked up companion planting online, tons of resources about Central Florida companion planting. And, I did an inventory of what seeds I had and started to match what plants did well with what plants and put them together. So again, in this row, we have beets, beans, and Toscano kale. And they're just kind of intercropped in the row. This is not a production farm. My focus is not to make money on this farm. There are some for-profit production farms that they look at every seed and they want to get the biggest yield out of it, so they measure the distance. I did not do that, so I made some mistakes. For example, I was in a rush and I seeded my turnips a little too close together. And so I had to go in and I had to weed out some of my turnips because they were just growing far too close. So you're going to make mistakes sometimes, and that's okay. Just really be patient with yourself and experiment. And if something doesn't come up, that's fine. Move on to the next thing. So let's take a look at what we have growing here. Swiss chard, one of my favorite crops. It's a slow germination, but once it gets going, you can just leave this in the ground until the hottest part of the year, like July, August, September. But pretty much from fall all the way through spring here in Central Florida, this will just keep producing and producing and producing. And the leaves are huge. And it doesn't have a lot of pests. Every once in a while you might get a little caterpillar hole, but it's so loaded with iron and nutrients, and it's so easy. You don't even really have to feed it that much. And so this is one of those crops that I tell people, if you're going to spend money on seeds, buy Swiss chard over something like romaine. I don't want to dish that, like, I don't want to knock down anybody who grows romaine, but it's not as nutrient dense. Honestly, I don't think it's anywhere near as flavorful for me personally. And it's a little bit higher maintenance. You know, as soon as it starts to get a little warm out, it starts to bolt, and you know, you have to chop it up and move on to the next thing. Swiss chard has this nice waxy texture to it. It's related to beets, and it can handle the heat. It can handle the sun, and it likes the cooler months for germination, but it's just loaded. It tastes just like spinach, loaded with nutrients. Turnips. Beautiful, beautiful. Very easy to grow. People don't usually know how to eat turnips, which I find is like, you know, a common excuse as to why people don't buy or grow these very often. There's so many recipes online. We have the internet at our fingertips. Awesome, awesome investment in your time and money, because this is a very hardy crop that grows very quickly. You can eat the leaves, but this is where the gold is right here. You can shave this baby up and put it on your salad. You can make it into chips and bake it. You can boil it and then mash it like a potato, and it's just loaded with nutrients and quick grower right here, which I like. Beets take time. I'm a little bit impatient with beets personally. They take time, and they're so sweet and so yummy that every time I grow them, they just get eaten by pests. But some of the farmers that I've hired through the years have really perfected their beet growing, so I applaud you, but turnips are the way to go.
You have a question?
Okay.
Stacy asks, do you ever regrow the tops after you eat the turnip?
I do not. I see a lot of stuff online about regrowing food scraps. And what I've noticed in my time is that sometimes, you know, the health of the plant has already been compromised when you grow from your food scraps. And you also don't know a lot about where that food item has come from. So you don't know if it was loaded with pesticides or fertilizers before it came to the grocery store, before it made it into your garden, right? So that might be something. You also don't know if it was grown in like a perfect condition, like a greenhouse, and as soon as you put it outside, it's gonna, you know. But what you can do is start from seed most of the time, either in a greenhouse of your own in the backyard, which I'll show you, or directly in the ground, depending on what variety, and be guaranteed success. So table scrap gardening is fun. I definitely do it with things like green onions. Green onions, you buy them at the store because you need them for a recipe that night. You take the bottoms, you stick them in the ground. But in terms of like turnips and things like that, I don't. It's just so much better for you when you do it straight from seed. Nutrients are right here, you know. When you ship vegetables from 1,500 miles away, they lose 40% of their nutrients. And most grocery stores are importing all of that produce. So it's the nutrient content has been compromised, basically, by the time you get it to your plate.
But even that, what you grew here, you wouldn't put that back in the ground.
No, I wouldn't. I would either eat the tops or use them in my compost. That's just me personally. And then start from seed something else. I wouldn't seed a turnip again in the same row that I put turnips in, right? Because you want to intercrop. Turnips are good companion crops with lettuce. So now I'm going to put lettuce in this row and put turnips where I had my lettuce growing, you know, in the season. We're in the middle of a transition right now in our season. The way I look at seasons, because of global warming, which is a thing, global warming is real, climate change is real. I see it first-handed when I'm growing food. Every year it's getting hotter, it's getting drier. So I'm seeing seasons change and shift and alter. What was growing in October of 2014 is now growing in November, in these years, because it's just getting hotter and summers are being extended, droughts are being extended. And so we have to recognize that when we're talking about growing food. So let's move on to the next thing. Look at this. In my cardboard and mulch, we have weeds popping in, right? And the first thought is, I'm gonna rip these out, but you don't have to do that if you research what it is. So this is Purslane, which is a cancer-fighting succulent that grows like a weed. It's very common in Florida. You see it a lot. My tortoise loves eating it, and you can make a tea out of it, and it has tons of nutrients that combat a lot of health issues. Research it just in case you have some other health issues that maybe the nutrients in this would not be good for, but look up Purslane. It's very, very good for you. You can sprinkle it in your salad, you can make a smoothie out of it, you can make a tea out of it, and it actually tastes really good. This, of course, is Spiderwort, which I already talked about. I didn't pull this out when I was weeding yesterday because it attracts the pollinators and it's pretty, so I'm going to leave it.
Caitlin says that the Spiderwort's also really yummy to eat.
Oh yeah, you can eat the flowers and things like that. I don't taste it as much. Borage is an herb that you can eat the flowers that I prefer more, but yes, it is very yummy. You can eat it. Edible flowers are great. Look what we have here. We have some peppers. Wow. So, love peppers. Love teaching kids about peppers too, because they love to just like pull it right off and take a bite, and I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. You always have to pinch the pepper off so that you don't rip the whole plant out of the ground, and you have to ask your parents before you take a bite because you never know if you're gonna grab a habanero or something. But we grow a very diverse range of peppers, and we haven't really had any issues with any in particular. I'd say my favorite pepper, which you can grow, peppers and eggplant you can grow multiple years if you take care of them. If you're feeding them all the time and you're looking at plants like you look at your kids, you want to feed them multiple times a day and you're going to want to give them water multiple times a day. So look at your plants very similar. Just because they do photosynthesis doesn't mean that they don't need other nutrients that you can give them, right? So back to the peppers. Serrano peppers are some of the easiest peppers to grow in this season that's coming up. We're getting into the warmer months. Serrano peppers, jalapeno peppers. I would also recommend, I'm not a huge fan of green bell peppers because they just take so long, but the banana peppers are also really, really good. I like things that produce quickly because I want to just keep eating off of them. I'm a little bit more impatient, but that's just me, right? And with peppers grow really well with tomatoes. They grow well with beans, and they're part of the same family as tomatoes. But they do grow well. They're good companion plants. They also grow pretty well with carrots. Tomatoes don't like their roots to get too hot, so you're probably going to have some issues in the warmer months, but Everglade tomatoes, they keep producing. The more you prune them, the more fruit they give you. So those are some fun tips, and we can talk more about that later. But I just wanted to show you kind of like the setup of what I have here. In the back, I have some native plants like beautyberry and cassia, which both attract birds with some of the fruit that they put off. So I'm purposely planting them to attract birds. Then you have some perennial spinaches like chia in the back. really beautiful white flowers that attract zebra longwing butterflies. I have a loquat tree, which I did not plant. It was just here with the house. And we kept cutting it because we thought it was a weed when I first moved in. And then it fruited for the first time recently. And I was like, oh, it's a loquat tree. Okay. And so it's been thriving and the birds love it. A lot of people say don't put things so close to the house. You could compromise the plumbing. So I would recommend putting a lot of cardboard about 4 or 5 feet off of the house, and putting mulch, and then putting your crops or whatever you're planting. Also take into consideration where your septic system is if you have septic. Don't put anything with long root systems anywhere near the septic. That's a common issue where people want to put trees in their front yard, but really try to look at where your septic tanks are, right? And again, Mexican sunflower. In this little area here in the front of the house, we have tons of snakes that live in the front. Snakes are really great. You know, you want to invite animals to take refuge here. Snakes will eat a lot of the bad vermin that might come and eat from your garden, right? A lot of people are afraid of rats and raccoons. Well, raccoons and rats have never been a problem for fleet farming. Raccoons and rats are more looking for your trash, looking for your compost maybe, but not really your vegetables. Rabbits, yes. Have I seen rabbits completely devastate a garden? No. Have I seen them eat a couple little spots here and there? Yes, and that's fine. Especially since this is organic, it's not treated with a bunch of chemicals. Let them have a nibble. If you start to notice that your entire yard is being devastated by a herd of rabbits, then you might have to have, some netting over your rows, or you might have to have a fence put in for deer. But in an urban setting like this, again, we've already decimated the ecological systems here. There's not a lot of places for animals and birds to go. So me growing food is not just something I'm doing for me. I'm sharing with my neighbors, and I'm investing in putting crops and plants that I know will attract other insects on purpose, because I want to build up the ecology here. I want to build a relationship with the birds and things like that. So we'll come over here and take a little look at some other ways that I do that.
You have a lettuce question.
Okay.
Logan is asking, can you grow lettuce over the summer? Will it survive with 4 to 5 hours of sun a day?
Oh, okay. Here, I'll show you this really quick. This is a really great Haitian and Jamaican crop. They call it callaloo, but this is amaranth. This is a hardy summer growing plant that will grow in the hotter months. Very delicious, nutritious, very good for you type of lettuce. A lot of people don't like it because it has a lot of flavor and it has a little bit of hairiness to it, but it's still good. The perennial spinaches grow well. Chia, New Zealand spinach, Suriname spinach. We'll show you some in the back. Easy growing all throughout the hotter months. Tokyo Bicana and Astro Arugula are 2 more delicate greens that we can grow up through July. You're lucky if you get into August. August and September are really hard because those are the drier, hottest parts of the year. So that might be where you invest more time in greenhouse production, and I'll show you a little pop-up greenhouse that's very affordable, that you can start to get ahead on your fall season. So, you can try and maneuver around when you're growing so that you don't have as much pain and heartache in the hottest part of the year. You can see in here. I purposefully upcycle little knickknacks and things that I find in the trash. And I bring this up because, you know, you can find ways to attract different types of birds and different types of insects and things like that by putting in more Florida-friendly, attractive tools to your yard. So bird feeders, really great thing that you can put in. Bird baths. You know, I found this piece of glass and this cute little base in the trash, and I took a bowl that I got for $2 at Salvation Army and filled it up with water, and now I notice a lot of birds come here. By attracting the birds here, they might eat some of the bad bugs that are nesting in the ground. They will poop in the garden, which is good. You want birds to poop in your garden, and you want them to be able to, you know, feed your garden. Little decorative houses like this, right? A bird's not really gonna live in there. The hole is too small, but lizards live in here, and wasps love building their little nests up inside. And so these are little things that I put around, little old lady knickknacks that I find in stores, or, you know, just I can make this easily out of wood. And you're attracting these different types of like paper wasps that will eat a lot of the bad bugs that are devastating your garden. So other helpful tools. Okay, that done. Here's my compost setup. Composting, that's a huge question that a lot of people have, composting. If you don't have $500 to get a big drop of compost and you want to make your own, it can be very simple, but again, it takes work. What you put into it is what you get out of it. And so you really want to layer your compost with some dry carbon-based things like leaves and paper and newspaper, paper bags, dry mulch or what have you. And then you're going to want to add your wet food scraps from your kitchen table. You know, by doing that layering, you're helping things to break down, which is in turn creating this beautiful mix of rich compost that you can do compost teas with, for example, where you take this. This is what I love. So right now I just put some leaves in here, and now I'm getting ready to put a lot of my wet food scraps in this little turning composter. And what I'm going to do is when I start to see it get really wet and way smaller pieces, then I'm going to completely empty it out, and I'm going to take either some type of net, and I'll show you that in a second, to filter out the big pieces and try to get as many small pieces as possible. I'm going to do this over a tarp, so anything that's falling onto the tarp, I'm going to put into a bin of water and let it sit for a couple days with the lid on as to not attract a lot of mosquitoes. And that is how you make compost tea. That's one of the many ways you can make compost tea. There's so many different ways, but that's how I do it. And the difference between this composter and this composter, they're both black because you want them to heat up to be over like 175 degrees. Shout out to O-Town Compost. He's really the expert, so you're going to want to check out Charlie Pioli and O-Town Compost. This one, I'm putting things more delicate, my salad greens, my coffee grinds, things like that, mixed in with things that are already pretty broken down, like leaves and paper. And I'm turning this often, and it's in full sun. right? So that I can get more out of this more frequently. Here is where I'm putting bigger things that are going to be set and forget for like a year, right? So this is a free composter that you can get from the city of Orlando. I live outside of the city limits, so I asked if anyone had one that they weren't using, and on one of those Facebook groups, they actually said that they had, somebody gave me one, which was really nice. Again, trade. If you don't have money to buy something, try to do a little trade. And this is where I'm going to be layering my weeds from gardening. I'm going to be putting big, you know, if I have a party and people bring a bunch of food and it's way more than I can stay on top of eating or something like that, I'm going to load it up in here instead of throwing it in the landfill, right? Bigger sticks and things like that, that'll take a while to break down, I'm going to put in here, and I'm going to set it and forget it and let it sit and cook and decompose. When I pull some worms out of the garden, I throw them in here to help expedite the process. But this is really where I'm going to get more compost a lot faster out of these smaller ones that I'm turning and spraying with water and trying to stay on top of expediting that breakdown. So we live on this little retention pond, which I think is a huge benefit because dragonflies are one of the best predators of insects that you can attract. So if you want to make a little man-made lake in your backyard or something to attract these pests, great investment, because dragonflies can eat thousands of bad bugs. And when I first moved in, I didn't see any dragonflies here. So I started to plant some things along the shoreline, and I tried my best to, combat some of the other invasive species so that we could have a suitable habitat for dragonflies. Really, really great investment. Now I see dragonflies almost every day. This is a great plant. Passion flower. As you can see, very eye-catching. Tons of fragrant, smells that are coming off of this. Very attractive. This is basically screaming for bees to come and get all of this pollen off of this plant. I love this plant. It is a little bit invasive though. So I would recommend anyone who's growing this to grow it in a pot at first, unless you have somewhere kind of far away, because it has literally grown up the side of my house. It's been kind of mean to some of the other plants around it. So you want to isolate it as best as you can. It does grow underground and it will sprawl, but in terms of building biodiversity, this is probably one of the most important plants that I have in my yard that attracts so many different types of butterflies and bees and bumblebees, because bumblebees get up underneath here and rub their little backs all along here to, bring that pollen around. For a grass cover, you want to plant something like mimosa. If you see this little pink that's growing here, this is a native plant called mimosa, the sensitive plant. When you touch it, it basically closes its leaves, very sensitive. But this is really great for bees and to add different types of nutrients to your soil, and it combats a lot of the grass that can be very invasive. I love this plant so much. And again, I don't do anything to take care of it. This is 6 years of me barely ever mowing and allowing the mimosa to take over the grass. I probably mow once a year, twice a year. If you want to attract hummingbirds, you can get something like the firebush. This is very commonly found in different nurseries. Shout out to Green Isle Gardens, South Seminole Farm and Nursery, Biosphere, Lucas Nursery. These are all nurseries that have educated people who can answer your questions, especially with regards to native plants. Please, please, don't go to Home Depot. I don't want to bash Home Depot, but there are ornamental plant growers that make a lot of money off of selling us things that are very detrimental to our natural lands. Mexican petunia, for example, I know from working out in Seminole County that they spend thousands of dollars removing Mexican petunia that you see at every McDonald's parking lot, you know? So you really want to try your best to be responsible with what's growing, because any bird can come and eat a seed and poop an invasive plant in the middle of an ecological conservation area and completely cause a lot of devastation from that. And there's no restrictions really on what's being sold at Home Depot. So do your best to ask those questions, right? And try to plant things for others, like hummingbirds and bees and butterflies, over yourself. Now, they are beautiful, far more beautiful than that manicured green grass, if you ask me. But I did not plant this for me. I planted this for the hummingbirds. So I have some fruit trees here that I've just collected over the years. Some mango, avocado, some Florida peach, papayas, bananas. I go to Orlando permaculture meetings or Central Florida garden fruit tree society meetings, different garden clubs, different Earth Day festivals, and just collect cuttings from friends' houses. And that's how I just have been able to, over the years, propagate everything I can and grow things, you know, and experiment. I personally like less work, so planting things that I know will do well without having to water it all the time. Mango, peaches, avocados, you know, these are all things that are less maintenance. You know, water it when you can, when you remember. Yucca is a great tree. I love it because I want to create shade, and it grows very fast, and you can eat the tubers underground. I believe you can eat the leaves, but you have to cook them first. But the tubers underground, basically like a potato, you can boil it, mash it. You can shave it into chips and bake it. And it's also so beautiful. So I love it just as an ornamental tree in the yard as well. It grows really tall, really fast, so it produces shade. Again, there was no life back here. It was like hotter than you could even believe in the peaks of the day. And now we're attracting different birds and things like that, and it's cooler back here. The more trees, the better. So here's a raised bed. We started by just wanting, you know, I work like 80 hours a week, so I didn't have a lot of time to invest in a big farmlet like this until quarantine happened. So I needed to grow in a container so that it can be less maintenance for weeding and things like that. So we had these old pieces of fence that someone threw away that we, you know, DIY'd into some raised beds, and that worked for small herbs and things like that at first. It was not irrigated, so we had some successes and some failures. But by moving the raised beds closer to the door, it actually holds us a little bit more accountable to using the herbs in our food, right? If you look at your yard, and most people that I talk to are like, I have this piece of my land that's in the furthest corner that will definitely get neglected. That is not a good first-time gardening choice. You want to put something close so that you will actually see it. You'll see when it gets overrun with weeds, and you'll actually use it. So the raised beds are where we put a lot of our sensitive herbs like basil, mint, things that when I'm in the kitchen, I just want to run out really quick and grab and integrate into our meal. So green onions, sage, some marigolds. I just transplanted most of these. We do have some tomatoes that are just starting. Lots of basil, green onions, a little bit of Swiss chard. I'm growing my potatoes in a container because they too can be a little invasive. And I noticed that the rabbits like them. So I want to try my best to contain the growth of the sweet potatoes. There's a duck in my bird bath. So something's working. But I will be moving the bird bath today. Excuse me, do you mind? Anyway, so we have our bird feeder here. I put a little stick so that the fatter birds can actually get on here. I see new birds that come to this bird feeder every single day. New species that I have to look up because I've never seen them before. Really great attractor. We have tons of squirrels that love to knock this thing over and eat the seeds. So I started putting little pockets of squirrel seeds in an area so that maybe they would leave this alone. You can also get a cone that protects your bird feeder from squirrels. This is a little low. I let them eat it. The ducks also benefit because then seeds are knocked all over the ground, which is why I have to move the bird bath. So the bird bath is going to be moved so that it doesn't get in the middle of the ducks and squirrels having the time of their lives back here. Alrighty. So here's the backyard farmlet. First things first, let's look at $1,000 budget. Okay? $1,000 sounds like a lot of money, but it definitely is an investment for all the reasons I talked about in this meeting so far. $500 for some really great nutrient-dense soil to start you out if you're one of those people that are outside more than once or twice a week and you're investing in building your soil. So it's a starting point. You don't have to spend $500 every year. It's just something to take your sugar sand and turn it into viable earth, okay? The irrigation. Irrigation can range you between $150 and $250, okay? Depending on the size of your farmlet. This is where you have your timer, which is like a $45 to $50 investment. This one's a little bit more expensive because it has the 3 different farmlets that it's going to, right? And then it has a splitter so that my hose can be connected separately. And by turning this on and off, that's how I get my hose to work. But my water is on all the time, and the timer sets it so that twice a day for 15 minutes, usually around 5, you can let the water just water your crops for you. If you don't have that kind of money, then you need to think about when you're going to put in your Google Calendar that you are going to go outside and water, and you have to hold yourself accountable. Just like gym day. If you're going to go to the gym, you need to put it in your calendar, and even when you don't want to, you still have to go because you have to hold yourself accountable. Same thing with gardening. Your plants are going to die if you don't invest that time. Weed liner. You can spend between $100 to $200 on weed liner. It's reusable. We use our weed liner over and over. I don't like it because sometimes it shreds a little bit, so you have some plastic waste. So what I did back here is around February and March, everyone's throwing away leaf matter. And a lot of people will throw away their leaves in these big paper bags from Ace Hardware. So I just I fold the bags, and then I use leaves that I get from people's yards. Yes, my car is a mess, but it's a sacrifice I had to make, right? And I layer it on the rows, and this is going to also decompose and feed your soil, right? So this is feeding your soil on top of the compost that I made a top layer over my Florida sugar sand.
There's a bird.
Right? So you have this Florida sugar sand here that without something to add some nutrients to it, it's just not really that easy to grow in. But we added a nice top layer of the compost from southeastern soil, which, you know, allows me to grow things like peppers and basil and this beautiful arugula. Okay? Definitely worth the money. My fire pit. Just going to show you this before the last part. So, not all bees live in hives. Some bees are solitary bees, and they need to live in the soil. So we put down some cardboard and a tarp and made this white sugar sand area around our fire pit. And it's loaded with bees. Tons of solitary bees that dig little holes. In fact, it's really hard because we have to like tiptoe around the bees. So we're going to move some stones so that we don't completely trample bee homes. But this is a really great way to provide habitat for those solitary bees. The actual fire pit itself, I like to use some of the charcoal that comes out of it for my compost, because very similar to biochar, which you can make in this little DIY chimenea. Shout out to Wade Nelson, who's my biochar mentor. You take some of these burnt pieces of wood charcoal, and you can mash it up with a hammer, put it in your compost, and it's on its own, it's a very porous carbon molecular structure that will absorb a lot of nutrients. And so it works as like a slow release of those nutrients over time, like a sponge. When you sprinkle this very porous molecule into your nutrient-dense compost, it'll soak it up and hold on to it, so that when you add it to your rows, it'll slowly secrete a lot of that that nutrient into your rows. When it's raining here, rain is coming down so hard, it's washing away so much of those nutrients out of your compost and out of your rows. So you need things like perlite, vermiculite, biochar, different minerals that are so porous they absorb water or they absorb minerals and nutrients and hold on to it to slowly release it out into your crops, right? So that you're not out here with Miracle-Gro, for example, just feeding basically nutrients to your plants every single day. So we'll move on to the next thing. Last but not least, I wanted to show a little greenhouse structure. I brought up on the other side of the house that a greenhouse is a great way to get ahead of your season. This little greenhouse was only $100 online. It does photo degrade pretty easily, so I have a little tarp over it. You know, you want to take care of it, so you want to strap it down as good as you can so that, you know, it's cheap, so the metal bends and things like that. But ultimately, it's a good way to hold some of that moisture and to create a good growing space for some of your crops. Some of the plants that do better with transplant are eggplants and peppers. It's always better to get them started in a greenhouse instead of directly seeding. Whereas things like lettuce, I like to directly seed just because the germination is so fast. But I mean, you know, look at this eggplant. It's already just like a baby. It's already given tons of nutrients right from birth, and it's going to now have a better immune system to fight off a lot of pests. It's going to be stronger and more resilient because you've given it a good head start in life. Same thing can be said with our children, right? You want to really nurture so many of our children straight out of birth. But not all plants are requiring this type of babying. There's just some that really like it. So tomatoes, for example, really easy thing to get started in our greenhouse. Things that I wouldn't start in a greenhouse, carrots. We've started Swiss chard. We've started herbs like fennel and things like that. There's other things that I just feel like okra. You're going to get a germination rate most likely out of okra. I've just seen a really great success with okra directly seeding, so I don't waste my time with this. But this is another outdoor classroom. So you're going to want to experiment, right? And don't be so hard on yourself if something dies. So that's the message I'm trying to get across here. And last but not least, I collect and hoard containers. And this is where I'm going to use my old pasta sauces as a container for my compost teas. I don't like to throw things away, and I like to get as many uses out of objects as possible to lower my footprint. So, you know, I drink some of these little green smoothies, and then I use the container to make my own laundry detergent or for my compost teas. And here's an example of an area where I'm making some compost tea. So you can see a lot of that perlite that was mixed in, those little white dots, that's perlite. And this soil, when you squeeze it, you can see that it holds its shape. That means it's loaded with nutrients, it's holding moisture. So good, so ready. There are some little wood chips in there and things like that. But, you know, we basically took our compost and used a tray like this, which we just got. You know, this is just DIY. This is not a professional setup. We got this from a grocery store, you know, and you put the compost on it and you shimmy it over a bin and it goes into the bin. There are more professional, more expensive ways of doing this, but we didn't want to invest in that money. We wanted to find a DIY way to filter some of the larger pieces of the compost into this nice refined product here that we can then use some of this in our bin with water and create a tea out of it. This is also good for creating that biochar mixture and adding some of that charcoal in here as well, crushed up in very small pieces. A lot of that Mexican sunflower leaf can be ripped up and tilled in here and put into the compost tea. And last but not least, saving some of our seasonings and things like that after this is empty. Love going to Bulk Nation and filling up my seasonings so you get more usage out of your containers. But seed saving is another thing that we invest time and energy in. And you know, you can take something like an old screen. Sometimes you can find these used online. Facebook Marketplace is a really great thing. Habitat for Humanity has the upcycling store. I think it's called Restore. And this is a really great way to lay out your seeds. Make a little shelf out of this so that air can flow from on top and from underneath. And you can dry out a lot of your seeds here and then basically funnel them into your seed saving containers when they're dry. You don't want them to have any moisture because then fungus can grow. So really great seed saving technique. And the most success we've had in seed saving has been from sunflower seeds or okra, marigolds, things like that. So we can go ahead and start taking questions.
I've pretty much already given you all the questions we had as they came in. There was one that we didn't get to, that's a question that we get all the time, which is, when are you coming to my city to take over my yard? So Stephen from Lakeland, who's actually a lot closer to us than a lot of the other requests we get, is asking this question, and it's a question we get practically every single day. So if you just want to reiterate the basic answer as to why we're doing this just in Orlando.
Okay. So we started just as a grassroots initiative of volunteers in Audubon Park and Winter Park, Florida. And we got thousands of inquiries after we went viral on NBC Nightly News to come to Australia, to Lakeland, to thousands of homes all over the world. We're so grateful for people who want to experience a fleet farming swarm ride, but we're out of their range. However, it's impossible for us to farm everywhere, which is why we do these free education events, and we're trying more and more to integrate them virtually so that people everywhere can be inspired to do this. But the basis of what we do, we're trying to teach you to empower you to grow your own food. Now, we do have an edible landscaping service that does build raised beds and organizes fruit tree installations and some other gardens for other, assisted living facilities or veterans homes or low-income schools or even individual residents. But ultimately, that service is only 20 miles of a radius around downtown Orlando because it's just not really worth it to you, the consumer, to have this inflated price of us traveling all the way to Lakeland, for example, to build a garden. We don't want to charge people a lot of money to do something that can be relatively close to free. We want to inspire and educate you to have the opportunity to do that. And our service of installing gardens is just another way for us to make money, to pay a livable wage to our farmers, to do these free education events, to just perpetuate more of that learning and understanding on how to grow food. So if you have any questions, please book a remote garden education opportunity on our website. It's a really great opportunity to have myself or Caroline, our Chief Administrative Officer's attention. 30 minutes to an hour. It's free. You can donate if you'd like, but we're not requiring a donation because we want to inspire you to grow your own food. You could have hundreds of pounds of produce, right? Not like an infomercial where you pay 9 payments of $99.99, whatever, You can have hundreds of pounds of food if you're willing to give work in return. If you're willing to be out there cultivating your land and dedicating the time, you can grow hundreds of pounds of food. Anything to me is better than spending time weed whacking, mowing, using pesticides and fertilizers on your lawn. Anything is better than that, in my opinion. But transforming your lawn can get you better food at your fingertips, at your convenience. It can build a relationship with your neighbors. You can build a relationship with nature and give habitat and nutrient resources for all these bees and birds that are looking for nectar. And they can't find a flower in sight because we've just built these homes, like a cookie cutter home, on these lawns that have nothing to offer any of the animals anywhere. And as soon as you start to integrate these little tools and tricks that I taught you, you'll start to see birds flourishing and bees flourishing around you because they just need it. And we need each other. So definitely give back.
We have 2 more questions.
2 more questions.
Stacy is asking about tips on growing tomatoes in a container.
Okay.
So not like outside in a raised bed in the ground.
Okay. So tomatoes. I love tomatoes. I love easy tomatoes. I like Everglades tomatoes. I like some of the smaller cherry tomatoes because they produce faster and they're usually less maintenance than those like beefsteak big tomatoes that are, usually really slow growing and attract a lot of caterpillars. So I try to lean people towards growing some cherry tomatoes because they'll have less issues with pests, because people get discouraged when they get a lot of caterpillars. I like caterpillars. I feed them to my birds, so I'm different. But tomatoes are really great. This is not the time to invest in that. Even in containers, if you are putting them close to a window, it's going to get really hot. And tomatoes don't like their root structures to be over like 70 degrees. You know, you should put about half of the container with mulch and half of the container with some really good soil. And you can, you know, even in one of those, 10-gallon buckets that you get from like Home Depot or Ace Hardware, you can drill holes in the bottom of that and use that for tomatoes. They grow super easy once they're in season, and they like cooler nights. Companion plant them with things like basil. Basil makes tomatoes taste better, and they're volatile chemicals. They are really great companion plants together. So I highly recommend using companion plants.
Sam is asking, I have a very shaded lot. What can I grow well in the shade?
In the shade, there's some herbs and some things. You definitely need a couple hours of light. If it's just dark where you don't even have grass growing, that's a sign. You can grow some perennial spinaches, New Zealand spinach, Suriname spinach. You can grow some mint, likes a little bit of shade. Green onions don't usually get bothered with shade. Some salad greens, depending on how filtered light there is. You can grow some like black-seeded Simpson and things like that in some filtered shade. It just depends on how much shade are we talking. If it's just blackout shade, you might have a problem because they need the sunlight to produce, some of the sugars that they need through photosynthesis. So it really depends on how much shade we're talking.
Last question. I don't even know if you could answer this, but maybe you could point them in a direction. Joe is asking, would it be possible for my blind friend to garden food?
Oh, of course. Yeah. My grandma was blind. So my grandma, who helped raise me, she was blind, and, she did so much that I didn't realize a blind person could do. She was just like everybody else. She cooked for herself. She cleaned better than I could clean. She decorated and reorganized and picked out her clothes. And, you just have to help set him up for success. So there are different tricks, and I'm sure with the advancement in technology since my grandma was alive, there are ways to make label makers with Braille, where you can help get a setup for a greenhouse or a compost tea maker and label everything with Braille label makers. Such innovative things are out there to help people in the blind community. And, if they're in Orlando, I would love to offer my time to come and work hand in hand with your brother. But there are definitely some tricks. And, in terms of gardening, it's just like a person who's never touched soil a day in their life. They need to feel and touch the plant over time to learn about it. So just like you're going to grow, the person from the question before is going to grow tomatoes for the first time and have to look at it and see how well it does in different spots in their home or on their patio. A person who's blind needs time to learn how to grow and touch and understand the plants in their own way. And they will get better at it the more practice that they have, whether they have the ability to see or not. So just giving them the tools. But that's a great question, because I would love to work more with the blind community. I think there's that fear of, giving them the best experience possible. We've never really had anybody approach us for that, but I would love, love, love to partner with an organization to give people that experience of harvesting, even if they are disabled in any way.
They might bring a better perspective with their other senses, you know, enhanced smell and touch.
If you eat, you can grow food. That's my opinion.
Should we give them a little guest star appearance?
Of course.
Before we wrap up?
2 quick things. So, I get a lot of questions about citrus, and I am not a citrus expert. Citrus is really difficult in Florida right now. We have a lot of citrus greening. We have some invasive pests from overseas that have come here and decimated the citrus industry. Really bad bacterial issues, funguses. Citrus is really hard because it was a monocrop for so many years here in Florida. Farmland for miles and miles and miles had very similar species of citrus which are not native to Florida. And through those years of course, adding different fertilizers and pesticides and antibiotics and genetically modifying them, they have created problems in the industry of citrus that really have decimated the citrus industry. And so one of the points I wanted to make is that this key lime tree, when I moved in, was here, and it was covered with that really dark black layer of gunk, citrus greening basically, on the leaf. And all the leaves were curled up, and I could tell that it was also being infected with a parasite. So I decided to start layering mulch and compost at the base and watering it often. And I started planting different types of perennial spinaches and, you know, different types of herbs around the base of it. And now you can see, after grooming a lot of the dead, taking a lot of the dead, like this I would take and just cut off. Anything that's dead, you know, I would cut off and just keep forcing this plant to focus its energy on producing really great healthy leaves and fruit. And now it fruits most of the year. It doesn't really have anything attacking it right now. I feed it and water it all the time. Every time I get a bag of compost, I try to sprinkle a little bit. And there's so many great organic citrus food companies that make compost specifically for citrus. And I highly recommend looking up agroecology methods when you're trying to grow any type of citrus. They need a lot of love and care and support and food, and they need to build up that resilience to fight a lot of these pests. And so finding companion plants and feeding your citrus is the way to go. And the last thing before our guest star is Nepalic. In Mexico, they eat this, and it grows like a weed here. Super good for you, loaded with calcium. You can eat it like a guacamole. You can use it like a taco and cut it in half and put it on the grill and stuff it with really yummy rice, and if you're not vegan, cheese, beans, things like that. You can... So good.
It's like a cucumber.
It's like a cucumber, and it has a citrusy taste to it. It's just so rich in nutrients. And if you have a tortoise like I do, I have an African sulcata tortoise who is 20 years old, and he loves this. His vet said I can feed it to him in moderation. So we are going to take a tour of Danny because he's the real star of the show. Danny! Look, baby! Hey! Come say hi to everybody! This might take a while. Hey, buddy! Hi! Good morning! You want to come say hi to everybody? Look! Oh my goodness! some people, it takes a lot to get them out of bed. Hey, baby.
He's a little camera shy right now.
Hi, baby. Look what we have here. What's this? Yay. So chilly out.
Yeah, he's
Too
slow because of
chilly.
the temperature.
Yay. Oh, yay. Isn't that so yummy? I brought up the Nepale because you don't have to do anything. You just stick a piece in the ground and it grows. Even in sugar sand. And it's so nutrient dense. Tons of vitamins, tons of minerals, and it can feed your tortoise. Yay.
What a good boy.
What a good boy. So I'm going to leave that there.
Alright.
Alright, so
Wrap it up.
I just wanted to say thank you so much for spending this time with me in my garden. Oh, sorry. Again, a learning process. You know, I make mistakes too. Just because I spend a lot of time doing this doesn't mean that I'm flawless in my growing experiences. You know, for example, I have a jackfruit I'm experimenting with and it's not doing so good. I've had it out here for like 2 years. It only had 2 leaves on it. I grew it from seed. It's not doing so good. Am I going to say that I kill everything and that I'm a terrible grower? No, I'm going to try again and feed this one as much as I can and try to get it to be happy. Same thing with my blueberry. I got this blueberry from a nursery here locally. It's not doing too good. I water it every day. I haven't grown blueberries before and it's not so happy. But you know, it's an experiment. Every day is an experiment. We have these amazing papayas that are right next to it. And so I'm going to do my best to focus my love and energy in these plants and see what works and what doesn't work. In this little area, I'm trying to do a little food forest. So I'm trying to plant some canopy trees like moringa, which is also a superfood. I'm trying to grow things that are a little bit lower, like shrubs, like, this tropical porter's weed and hibiscus, cranberry hibiscus. I'm trying to grow things like banana trees that'll also be canopy. And then down at the bottom, I'm trying to grow some things like New Zealand spinach, aloe, things that will grow and sprawl and kind of take over this mulch area, some rosemary, some basil, Suriname spinach. Really easy thing to grow and cultivate. Cuban oregano, Suriname spinach, Suriname cherry. And this is kind of my food forest little play site. So things I put in here, sometimes they die. And sometimes other things die completely and then come back the next season. So you just have to be patient and give yourself an opportunity to explore and ultimately evaluate how much time you can give back to your garden. I'm after quarantine going to go back to probably working 80 hours a week again, and what that'll mean is that I will rely on my weed liner and my irrigation, and I will rely on things that can help expedite my growing experience, like germinating in a greenhouse. These little cheats are easy ways to set yourself up for success. And if you don't have any more questions, thank you so much. I'm so excited to have this chance to share with you kind of my home experience. And please, anybody who puts a seed in the ground is a hero to me, and I love and value you. And if you want to have a one-on-one, please schedule a remote consultation on our website, fleetfarming.org. Thank you.